Okay, welcome everybody to this third webinar in a series connected to EASY, the European Environment for Scientific Software Installations. Today is the third webinar. There's two more coming, a bit more focused on the EASY project than itself, on different aspects of that, next Monday and the week after. So if you haven't registered yet for these last two webinars, you can still do so through the web page linked here and also through the QR code shown here. So today we will focus on EasyBuild, which is one of the tools we use in the EASY project to install software into the EASY software layer. I'll be covering today's webinar together with Caspar from SURF in the Netherlands. And let's start things off by taking a look at the agenda. So we are, this is an introduction to EasyBuild, so we'll start essentially from scratch, explaining what EasyBuild is. If you already know EasyBuild a little bit, we'll very soon go into an overview of changes in the last release of EasyBuild, the new major version, EasyBuild 5.0. And then we'll start getting a bit more hands-on. So Caspar will show us how to install and configure EasyBuild and show its basic usage. Then we'll deep dive into some troubleshooting aspects, briefly cover how you can add support for more software to install that with EasyBuild. And we'll also cover some more advanced topics like hooks to customize the behavior of EasyBuild. And then Caspar will wrap up to show how EasyBuild can be used together or on top of Easy to install software and while getting some of the dependencies via Easy. So let's get started with what is EasyBuild. Some of you may already be aware, so EasyBuild is a tool or a framework for installing software. And usually that involves building that software from source. So we call it the build and installation framework. There's a strong focus here on scientific software, on performance and on HPC systems. And you will see that coming back throughout the presentation. EasyBuild is open source software itself with a GPL v2 license, and it's implemented in Python. There's a whole history behind EasyBuild. So it was created in-house here at Kent University back in 2008. After a while, we were confident enough to make it available as open source software publicly in 2012. And since then, a whole community has grown around it. We now have over 1,000 members in the EasyBuild Slack, for example. And there's a bunch of links there to link to the website, documentation, to join the EasyBuild Slack, and so on. There's also very recently a blog, an EasyBuild blog, which for now only has one post, but we will hopefully be adding more posts in the coming weeks and months. So EasyBuild in a nutshell is a tool to install software and to provide a consistent and a well-performing stack of scientific software installations. You can see it as a uniform software for installing scientific software. So no matter whether the software is in C++ or in Python, or whether you have to use CMake or any other tool to install it, you can basically always interact with EasyBuild, and EasyBuild knows how to install that software for you. So it automates the installation process and anything that's boring, like unpacking tarballs, applying patch files. So anything that you typically have to do when installing software, it automates for you. You can also give it to the researchers that use your HPC infrastructure. So they can also use EasyBuild to install software themselves because it doesn't really require any admin permissions. All they need is write permissions to a particular location in their account, and then they can self-manage a software stack, either from scratch or on top of what's already available. It has also become a platform for HPC sites to collaborate around the world. So EasyBuild is used all over Europe, but also in the US and Canada, New Zealand, so a whole bunch of places. And as such, it's become an expert system for installing scientific software. So it includes a whole bunch of tricks and tweaks to make things work better, to fix known issues with some software. And all of that is embedded into the tool itself. So you can fully autonomously install software, and more specifically scientific software, including all the dependencies that are needed for that software. And EasyBuild also generates environment module files. So you can, end users can just use module load commands to activate certain software that was installed with EasyBuild and then start using it. You don't need any admin privileges. You only need write permission to wherever the software will be installed. And it's also highly configurable. So there's very little things in EasyBuild that are hard-coded and that you cannot get around. Usually there's a related configuration option available. So you can tweak the behavior of EasyBuild. It's also easy to extend. It has a sort of plugin mechanism where you can add additional scripts or where you can even implement what we call hook functions. So you can customize the behavior of EasyBuild if there's a need to. It also does very detailed logging of all the operations it executes, so how it installs software and why it makes certain decisions. And you can get an overview of what's going to happen via the dry run mode without actually doing anything on the file system. So you can check how EasyBuild will install something or which dependencies are still missing. And with the trace mode, which is now enabled by default in the latest EasyBuild version, you can also see what it's doing while the installation is still running. We also support what we call custom module naming schemes. So how the module tree, so how the organization of the module files, the environment module files looks like, is also fully under your control if you want to change that. It has integrations with a bunch of tools like LMOD, like Singularity or Obtainer for creating container images, like Slurm for submitting installations as jobs onto a cluster, and also with GitHub, and we'll have a good example of that, what that means. It's very actively developed. There's changes going into the develop branch of EasyBuild on a daily basis, and there's a worldwide community around it that can support it. We've done very frequent stable releases since 2012. That has slowed down a little bit. So it's more towards the 8 weeks or even 10 weeks now in between releases. But frequent releases are going out. And we are very serious about testing. So we do very extensive testing whenever something is changed in EasyBuild. That usually corresponds to unit tests that are being added. We test incoming contributions, and we also do regression testing between EasyBuild releases. There's various support channels. There's an active mailing list. There's a very active Slack channel with over 1,000 people in there. And every other week we have EasyBuild conf calls where we discuss updates that have been happening recently, and where there's also a chance to ask questions if you have any. And every year we have an EasyBuild user meeting. This year we had the 10th EasyBuild user meeting. There's three main things we focus on in EasyBuild. That's performance, reproducibility, and community efforts. So performance is, of course, we install software from source to make sure we optimize it for the host that it will be run on. We focus on reproducibility, so we want to make sure we have things under control in terms of which versions are installed and how those are installed. And community effort, we work together with anyone who's interested in working together on EasyBuild, and that way leverage each other's work. It also helps to take a look at what EasyBuild is not. So it doesn't mean to replace any standard tools like CMake or pip, but it's really Python scripts or Python code that wrap around those tools to help automate the installation procedure. You typically use EasyBuild alongside your Linux package manager. So some packages like OpenSSL or Slurm are still installed with your OS package manager, but then you build software from source on top of that using EasyBuild. And unfortunately, it's not a magic solution, so you may still run into installation problems every now and then, depending on your system configuration. Now let's have a brief look at some terminology, because that's important. Some of these aspects will come back throughout the rest of the webinar. So we talk about things like easy blocks and easy configs. What does it actually mean? And also when we talk about modules, what do we mean exactly with modules? Is it Python modules, environment modules? So some of these terms are overloaded, and it helps with zooming in to these things a bit. So to start with, we start with the framework, the EasyBuild framework, which is the heart, the core of EasyBuild, which is really a selection or a collection of Python code, Python modules, which are well organized in packages, and they implement functionality that you often need for installing software from source. So that, for example, includes unpacking tarballs, applying patch files, running shell commands, generating module files, and so on. It defines an abstract installation procedure, which is broken up into separate steps, like a configure step, a build step, a test and install step, and so on. And it has a whole hierarchy, a namespace. EasyBuild something is the collection of Python packages that the framework provides. It also gives an EP command, which is a shell wrapper script around the Python code to easily launch EasyBuild. But you can also use EasyBuild itself as a Python library if you want. And there's a dedicated GitHub repository for the EasyBuild framework. So this is the heart of EasyBuild. But all it has is an abstract installation procedure. So it doesn't actually know, the framework doesn't know about any particular software package, how to install it. It just defines the whole procedure as a whole and has a lot of supporting functionality around it. Then there's an EasyBlock. An EasyBlock is really a single Python module. You can look at it as a Python script, and it's something that interacts with the EasyBuild framework. So it leverages all the functionality that's available in there to really define an installation procedure, a specific installation procedure. So for example, when you install something with first calling cmake and then calling make and make install, there is a dedicated EasyBlock, a dedicated Python script available in EasyBuild that defines that specific installation procedure. The EasyBlock can be generic, so without really being tied to one specific software package, like installing a Python package, for example. There's a generic EasyBlock for that. Or it can be very software specific. So this is really for more complex software or software that has a very involved installation procedure, like OpenForm or Wharf, for example. So that the EasyBlock, the logic in there only makes sense for that specific software package. So this Python script, this EasyBlock, can then be controlled through various parameters. We call these easyconfig parameters. For example, there's a parameter to specify which configure options should be used for the cmake command, for example. And all these EasyBlocks also live in their own separate GitHub repository. And they don't actually necessarily need to be part of the EasyBuild installation. There's an option that says include EasyBlocks, where you can pull in EasyBlocks that live in your home directory, for example, and make sure that EasyBuild can use them. So they sort of act as a plugin to the EasyBuild framework. And then the third main terminology is easyconfig files, or just easyconfigs, which are sometimes called, in a more generic term, build recipes. So this is a text file that specifies to EasyBuild what should be installed, so which software should be installed, which version, using which compiler toolchain and which dependencies and which versions of those dependencies. All of that is specified in an easyconfig file. It is a regular text file, but it's actually in Python syntax. So it really defines key value parameters in Python syntax. The file names typically end in .eb, but it could be anything really. And it defines also a naming scheme, at least a standard naming scheme for these files that is used in EasyBuild itself. But the file name only really matters when it needs to be found by the dependency resolver of EasyBuild. You can use an example.eb or a tool.eb easyconfig file and just install that. That would also work. And also for this, we have a separate GitHub repository. So this stepwise installation procedure is what the framework, EasyBuild framework, defines. And then some of these steps, like configure, build, and install, must be specified by one EasyBlock that you're using. And the details of what that EasyBlock does, so which software is being installed, which version, and so on, are then specified in an easyconfig file. So this already starts to pull things together a bit and explain the overall picture. Then there's a couple more things which we'll quickly go over. So a newer concept is called easy stack files. These are really, let's say, a list of multiple easyconfig files that should be installed. With a syntax like this, so the name of the easyconfig file, and then maybe with some options specific to that easyconfig file. So it's a single file in the YAML syntax in this case that you can give to EasyBuild and just say, please install all these things one by one in sequence, and EasyBuild will make sure that all these things are actually installed. We will also sometimes refer to extensions. So extensions are things like Python libraries, for example, or Perl modules, R libraries, which are not installed standalone, but are typically installed in groups, in bundles. And we name them extensions because they're always installed on top of something else. So when you're installing a Python package, you're relying on the fact that a particular version of Python is there along with its standard library. So they're always relying on another software to actually be used. EasyBuild can install these separate if you want to, but they're typically installed together in what's called a bundle. And yeah, when you combine all these things, you can do an R installation, for example, with what we say battery included, or batteries included, which is R itself, but then with a whole bunch of additional R packages included as extensions. Dependencies is a well-known concept. In EasyBuild, we discriminate between two types of dependencies, two types of software packages that are required for something else. Build dependencies are only required when installing something. So CMake or pip is a typical example of that. As soon as the software is installed, you don't need CMake anymore itself to use that software. But regular dependencies or runtime dependencies are ones that you actually also need when using the software that's being installed. So OpenBlast, the library for linear algebra routines, is a typical example of that. Toolchains are then a particular type of group of dependencies and usually involve a compiler and a couple of libraries. Toolchains can be full, so that means they have a C, C++, and Fortran compiler together with libraries for MPI and linear algebra routines and FFTW, or they can be partial toolchains, sometimes called sub-toolchains, which exist only out of compilers, for example. And then there's common toolchains. Two typical ones is the FOSS and Intel toolchains, which you'll see pop up very often in EasyBuild. Then modules, when we refer to modules, we usually mean environment modules. So these modules that are exposed to end users for activating software. And when we mean something else, so when we mean Python modules, we'll usually use the full term Python module to make sure there's no confusion. When we talk about modules or environment modules, these are consumed by a modules tool, typically LMOD, but it could be the Tcl-based environment modules implementation as well. And these are the files that EasyBuild generates to make sure that users can use the software that is being installed with EasyBuild. And then bringing it all together here, so we have the framework that uses EasyBlocks to install software. That could include extensions like Python packages. All those installations are done with a particular tool chain, so a particular compiler tool chain. And EasyBuild does what is specified or installs what is specified in one or more EasyConfig files. And these define EasyConfig parameters that then control exactly what the EasyBlock does. The build dependencies and dependencies that are necessary are installed first by EasyBuild. And at the end, it will also generate module files for each of the installations. And then if you use an EasyStack file, you can describe a collection of software that EasyBuild should be installed. So this brings all the terminology together. Okay, then let's take a quick look at the major changes in EasyBuild 5. So this is mostly for people already involved or already familiar with EasyBuild a little bit. So EasyBuild 5 was released a couple of weeks ago, mid-March 2025. And after that was done after a long period of active development on EasyBuild 5. So we actually took about 2 years to implement all the changes that we have in mind that eventually landed in EasyBuild 5. It took so long because meanwhile we also released additional versions, additional releases of EasyBuild 4. So we kept that going in parallel, sort of. So we had to distribute our development efforts between 2 versions. But that effort was finally wrapped up a couple of weeks ago. And all in all, the result of about 1,300 merge pull requests is what is available in EasyBuild 5. So a lot of development, a lot of work is behind us. And one important thing here is, as soon as EasyBuild 5 was released, that means the end of EasyBuild 4. So there will be no more EasyBuild 4 releases. So if you want to keep using EasyBuild, you'll have to migrate to EasyBuild 5 and make sure you're aware of what has changed in there and what you may need to change as well. So two really breaking changes that happened in EasyBuild 5 is that you need a sufficiently recent version of Python to run it. So Python 3.6 or newer. Python 2.7 or 3.5 are no longer supported to run EasyBuild with. And you also need to make sure you have a somewhat recent version of the modules tool, so either LMod or environment modules. And both these versions are actually years old already. So it's not like it's a very bleeding edge version that you need. A bunch of changes were made in the default configuration of EasyBuild. The biggest one of that is that we do RPod linking by default now. So whenever EasyBuild builds an application that links to dependencies, it does that through RPod linking, which is a particular way of making sure the dependency can be found. So it's a bit more hardwired, and it makes the installations a bit more robust. The other main thing is that you'll see trace output by default. So the output is a bit more informative by default, which is useful to understand what's going on in the background. I won't cover all these bullet points one by one because many of them are very detailed. But these are the things you should be aware when you're switching from EasyBuild 4 to EasyBuild 5. Make sure you are fully aware of what these are and if you're happy with these defaults or not. If not, you can always reconfigure EasyBuild to behave differently than EasyBuild 5 does by default. There's also some changes in behavior. Some of these are very detailed and don't matter for most people. Some of them are just a change in default behavior that is easy to mitigate. So for example, the dry run mode, which Casper will show in the hands-on, that gives an overview of what EasyBuild is going to install. By default now no longer enables the dependency resolution, the dash-robot option. So if you only look at, have a dry run overview of what is already installed and what is not installed yet, you want to make sure you add the -R option or dash-robot option to that to get a full overview. Again, here, many of these things are really detailed and they don't even include all the things that were changed in EasyBuild 5. You'll need to check the documentation for that. And most of these are probably a non-issue, especially if you're new or relatively new to starting with EasyBuild. But everything that was changed is well documented. Then perhaps the most interesting part is the enhancements in EasyBuild 5. Again, lots of bullets here, and this is only half of it. But the main thing and the one thing that took a lot of effort is changing underneath the covers how EasyBuild runs shell commands. So we have a new function for that. It's called run shell command, and this enables the one main feature, or let's say the main selling point of EasyBuild 5 is that it has support for interactive debugging whenever a shell command fails. You can very easily start an interactive shell and then poke around there and try to understand why that shell command failed. And I'll show that hands-on a bit during the troubleshooting part. There's other smaller enhancements as well, which are interesting. So everything combined really makes it a compelling release to switch to. Again, lots of these things are details and may not matter to you, so I'll largely skip over them. Also, the second part here is probably even more detailed. Maybe the one thing worth pointing out here is a somewhat breaking change in the configure make generic easy block, so the one that does configure make install. Whenever during the configure step, EasyBuild notices unrecognized configure options. So there's a small warning printed by the configure command for that. It will stop the installation right there and basically flag that unknown configure option. So before in EasyBuild 4 and older versions, it was silently ignoring that warning. Now we make that a bit more strict and we want to make sure that every configure option that is specified is also a known configure option. A bunch of functionality was removed in EasyBuild 5. That's just only stuff that we have marked as deprecated for quite a long time already. So if you were still relying on that, this will no longer be working in EasyBuild 5. So you'll have to maybe finally act on this and make sure you use the replacements or the new mechanisms. And also in EasyBuild 5, a couple of things that we want to get rid of in a future version have been deprecated. So if you see any warnings pass by and that tell you that you're using something that's deprecated, you want to make sure you stop relying on that. Again, here, way too many details to get into the weeds of this. But one thing is, for example, the parallel easyconfig parameter that you can set in easyconfig files to parallel equals 1 to avoid that the build is being done in parallel. This is no longer supported, and it's essentially replaced by the max parallel EasyConfig parameter. And also, if you have any hooks or any custom easy blocks that are still using the old run command function, you want to make sure you make the necessary changes to adopt to the new run shell command function. And all of these deprecated things will actually be removed or will stop working in an EasyBuild 6 version that will be released in about 2 years from now. So you want to make sure you act on these warnings if you see them popping up. Also here, most of these are again very detailed, and as long as you're not seeing warnings, you're not hitting any deprecated functionality, so you should be safe. And then the inevitable question after a major release is, what about the next major release? So EasyBuild 6, we already have some ideas of what will happen in there, high-level ideas or efforts that have already started, like improving the consistency of how things are named in EasyBuild, EasyConfig parameters or configuration options. Sometimes things separated with a space get an underscore or a dash or are just glued together. And we want to make sure we use the same kind of naming rule across all things in EasyBuild going forward. So that will be a bit of effort to make sure we have things aligned there. We'll work on that in the next couple of months, and those changes will then be included in EasyBuild 6. After the long development time for EasyBuild 5 and the long lifetime of EasyBuild 4, we now want to be a little bit more aggressive maybe, and try to push out the next major release about every 2 years from this point forward. So we already have an estimated release date for EasyBuild 6, and we'll see how close we actually manage to stay to that. So yeah, another thing is we'll probably require the use of Python 3.9 or newer for EasyBuild 6, because there's already features in EasyBuild 5 that only work reliably with Python 3.9, for example. We think that's a next reasonable cutoff to aim for. All right, and with this, I'll hand it over to Kaspar for a bit of hands-on work with installing and configuring EasyBuild.
Yeah, thank you. I'll take over the share. All right, so installing EasyBuild. First of all, what do you need to install EasyBuild? Basically, you need a Linux operating system. macOS is supported, but very basic. But most people will probably use it on a Linux system anyway. In terms of Python, Kenneth already mentioned it, Python 3.6 is the minimum requirement, but Python 3.9 is actually recommended. This is because of one of those options that Kenneth mentioned that was added in EasyBuild 5, which is to create reproducible tarbles if you use the git config keyword parameter. That's only possible if we use a new enough Python. And then you need an environment modules tool, so either lmod or Tickle of a new enough version. So there's different options to install EasyBuild. The first and simplest is probably just to get it from PyPy. So you just do a pip install EasyBuild in your virtual environment or with a -- user or whatever your preferred approach is. Another way, and that's actually the recommended way, is to install EasyBuild as a module itself. But for that, you first need to have EasyBuild. So it's kind of a bootstrap procedure. So typically you would do the pip install first to get a PyPy version. And then with that EasyBuild, you can install an EasyBuild module. And the third option is to do a development setup. So then basically, if you want to help with the development of EasyBuild, you clone the GitHub repository that you're interested in, and you update your path and Python path accordingly so that EasyBuild can find the Python files from that repository. We won't go into the last option, but I'll show you the first two options. And with that, let's switch to an actual terminal. Let's see. So the first thing I will do is just create a Python virtual environment. And I just do this with my system Python. I'll activate it. Let me just upgrade pip, why not? And then we'll install EasyBuild. And Archspec and Rich are actually optional, but Rich gives you nicer text output, and Archspec, I think it helps with the, there's a command that I'll show later on, which can print the system specs. And you only get the full thing if you install Archspec. So that will take a couple of seconds, not too much. And now we should have an EasyBuild version. Let's see if that's true. Yeah, so we have EasyBuild 5 installed and ready to go. So that was pretty simple. I will actually not swap back and forth between the slides and this one because I think it's just more helpful if you see the commands that I'm executing. But the slides are there as a reference. Let's see, some common commands, of course. If you're new to EasyBuild, first thing you want to know is what can I do? The main command from EasyBuild is EB, and there are a ton of help options, a ton of options that you can use. If you watch the help, you can see all of those options. Pretty intimidating if you're new to it, but don't worry, most of them are pretty advanced, so you can get started right away. And as you hit some issues, you might figure out, hey, I need something. Then it's worth looking at the help to find the relevant configuration option. There's also a show config option. We'll get back to that later as well. I already want to show it. This basically shows some of the configuration parameters for EasyBuild. If you've not changed anything and it's just the default configuration, it only prints these ones. Normally, it prints all of the ones that you've changed in either a configuration file or through any other means, like an environment variable or a command line option. Again, we'll get back to that in more detail later on. The other one is show system info. That's particularly helpful if you run into an issue that you want to report upstream in EasyBuild. It helps the rest of the EasyBuild community to figure out what kind of system you're running on and what might be your issue. And this is also where Archspec helps get some additional information. I think without it, you don't get the actual architecture name for the CPU. All right. So if I want to update EasyBuild, of course, now I already have the latest version installed, right? But if I run from a pip installation, I could just do pip --upgrade EasyBuild, and that would update to the newest EasyBuild, but that would do an in-place update. The other thing that I can do, and that's basically the second installation option that I mentioned, is to install EasyBuild with EasyBuild. So I can do install latest EB release. That will always install the latest released version of EasyBuild. And it will, oh, I forgot something. Well, it's good that we see this. You actually need the wheel module for this. So we'll install that first. If you don't have that on your system Python, then you might run into this issue. Let's try that again. And that takes a couple of seconds. And then we have an EasyBuild installation for which a module file is also generated. So then we can actually have an EasyBuild in our module environment. Let's see, I don't believe we actually see this immediately. If I try this, no, it doesn't find it. And the reason is that you need to adjust your module path, because EasyBuild, if you don't configure it by default, it will install in your .local/EasyBuild folder. And then the module file will be in this prefix. So unless I add that to my module path, the module command simply won't know where to search for this stuff. So I can add it. I could just say C home.local EasyBuild modules all. Now it's added to the module path, and now I should be able to find the EasyBuild 5 module that I just installed. And indeed, it's there. All right, so that's basically the recommended approach. Now you have an EasyBuild module, and from that point onward, whenever you need to update, you can use that EasyBuild module to install a new EasyBuild release, right? You can throw away your pip installation, you don't need it anymore. You've basically completed the bootstrap procedure. All right, let's move back to the slides for a little bit. There we go. So we've covered this. We've covered installing EasyBuild as a module. And now we'll talk about configuring EasyBuild. So it's funny, we've first installed EasyBuild and now we will do the configuration. The reason is we can do configuration through a couple of things. We can either create a config file, set environment variables, or set command line options. As you've seen, by default, it already does something sensible, right? So I can do an installation. I've actually installed EasyBuild with EasyBuild. That works, but you might want your software in a different installation prefix. You might want to control where your downloaded sources get stored because maybe your home directory is not so big and you want it somewhere else. And also for something like the build directory, which is pretty I/O intensive, you might not want to do that on your home directory, but you might want to do that on some local storage. All right, so there's a lot of configuration settings that you can set. In bold here, you see sort of the three most important things to consider. So the installation path, that is something you typically want to control. If you're managing an HPC system, you typically want this in some common prefix that all your users can access, right? The source cache, again, you want something with sufficient storage, and the build path, you want something with sufficient I/O capabilities. You can view the full list of EasyBuild configuration settings through the eb-help option that we just watched, but as I showed, it's a lot, right? So there's a lot of configuration settings. You definitely don't need to change all of the defaults, right? For a lot of these things, the defaults are just fine. One of the things to take into account might be the modules tool. So that's at the top here. By default, it assumes an LMOD modules tool. If you have Toggle modules, then you have to set this to change it from the default. So I already quickly mentioned there are three ways in which you can configure EasyBuild. You can create a configuration file, you can set environment variables, and you can pass command line options to the EB command. All of these works, and each configuration setting can be specified via each of these levels. There are no exceptions. And this procedure is hierarchical. So basically, you first have the default options, right? If you specify something in a configuration file, that overrides the default settings. If you then set an environment variable for that same option, it will override the configuration file. And if you then also pass that same option on the command line argument, it will again override the environment variable. So the command line option always wins. The EasyBuild configuration file is a standard ini format, so it's a key value thing. You can use eb-config help to give you a starting point that basically creates a configuration file completely with every option as a command, and then you can uncomment whatever you want to override. There's default directories where EasyBuild searches for these configuration files. So if you put it there, it will find it automatically. Of course, you can also put it somewhere else, but then you have to point EasyBuild to that configuration file through one of the other configuration options. So for example, by setting an environment variable. Typically, a configuration file is nice for the things that are static, right? The things that you do once and forget, like, okay, what modules tool do I use on this system? That's not likely to change on a daily basis. So you probably just want to hard code that in a configuration file and be done with it. Stuff that you change on every run, you typically want to do as a command line argument, and stuff that, changes sometimes, but not very often. That's typically where you would use the environment variables. Mind you, we're talking configuration. It's not the same thing. The EasyBuild configuration is not the same thing as an EasyConfig file, right? So the EasyBuild configuration is how does EasyBuild itself behave. The EasyConfig files are specifications of how do I install particular software with the EasyBuild. So as mentioned, you can also do this with environment variables. Basically, what you do is you prepend EasyBuild underscore to the name of your configuration option, and you replace every dash in that option with an underscore. So for example, for the module syntax option, you would set the EasyBuild underscore module underscore syntax environment variable. Quite a common approach is just to put this in a shell script or a module file to dynamically configure EasyBuild. And as mentioned, configuration settings specified as command line arguments always win. So you can always override what you've set through other means. Here, if you do the double dash with the name, that's basically the argument that you need to pass to change the configuration option. So for example, dash dash module dash syntax. And some of these options have a corresponding shorthand. So for robot, there's a shorthand eb-r. In some cases, only really the command line option makes sense, like eb-version. You can set it as an environment variable. It works, but yeah, that's not really a sensible thing to do. And again, the command line options you typically use for things that you want to change with every run of EasyBuild, right? So maybe you want to try some installation in a temporary prefix, so you temporarily set a different install path. Now, it can be quite difficult because of these multiple levels of configuration to remember how EasyBuild was configured and what in the end the effective configuration is. But fortunately, we have the eb-show config command to remind you. It shows you the configuration settings that are different from the default and some standard ones, even though they are default. And it also shows you at which level each of those configuration settings was specified. Now, since show config doesn't show all of the options, you can actually also do -show-full-config. Then you get every configuration option, even if it's still the default. That particularly helps you if you're unsure what the default is, right? Then you can see what that default is. So let's go through an example. I've created a configuration file. It just sets the prefix and the build path. I will actually set an environment variable to point EasyBuild to use that configuration file. So that will be the EasyBuild_config files environment variable, because the name of the configuration option is config files. And then if I do a show config, you will see basically where each of the configurations get set. So let's give that a try. Let's go back to the terminal. Give me 1 second. Where was I? Yes. Whoop. So I have here a configuration file for EasyBuild that just sets the prefix and the build path. I will export an environment variable, EasyBuild config files equals, and then point it to this config file. And now if I run, again, I will set a command line argument just to also be able to see the effect of that. And then I run a show config. And now you clearly see where it was set. So you have C is command line argument, D is default value, E is the environment variable, or F is the configuration file. Basically, I have one thing that gets set through an environment variable. That's this one. That's the location of the configuration file I want to use. Then I have several items that are set through the configuration file. That's because the prefix actually controls the prefix for several of these path-like variables. So the build path, the install path, etc. You can all control it through a single configuration option. And then finally, I've passed a custom install path on the command line, and you see that here. All right, and just to show you the full config, as we haven't shown that command. That's a long list, right? That's 270 configuration items, and that helps you inspect what the defaults for each of these are. Back to the slides. So basic usage of EasyBuild. Now that we've installed and configured EasyBuild, we can run the EB command to start doing additional installations. There's kind of a typical workflow to it. Again, typically you pass an EasyConfig file or an EasyStack file. As Kenneth mentioned, an EasyStack file is a list of EasyConfigs, basically. So that's one way in which you can install a whole list of EasyConfigs in an easy way. The robot option is required to install missing dependencies. That includes the toolchain itself, right? So if you don't have the toolchain installed yet, and you do pass the robot option, it will also include building the toolchain. And the typical workflow is that you first find whatever EasyConfig you want to install, like what software are you interested in. You probably check the EasyConfig file to see what is it going to do. Does that make sense to me? And you can check for missing dependencies. So what do I think, or what does EasyBuild think it needs to install? You can double check your EasyBuild configuration, right, with your show config. And then you typically instruct EasyBuild to actually do the installation. And especially if there's a lot of dependencies that you need to install, this might take a fair bit of time. So that's why we say enjoy your coffee or two while EasyBuild does the work for you. So there's different ways to specify which EasyConfigs it should install. You can do this by relative path or absolute path. You can pass it the name of the EasyConfig file. You can pass it an EasyStack file, and then the EasyStack file can contain relative or absolute path to EasyConfig files. And EasyBuild would just resolve the EasyConfig file names via a search path to figure out, like, okay, which EasyConfig do I need to install? I'll show that at the end of the slide when we do an actual search for BCF tools. EasyConfig file names themselves, they only matter when missing dependencies need to be installed. So the robot mechanism searches based on dependency specs and the EasyConfig file name. So if it sees like I need to install dependency X version Y, then it will actually check some of these files and figure out what do I need. So with the EB search option, you can quickly search through the available EasyConfig files. Let's have a look at BCF tools, see if we can find anything for BCF tools. This is a very small package. As you can see, there are several versions of BCF tools built with different tool chains. So basically the regular procedure is that we name them the name of the software, then the version of the software, name of the tool chain, and then the version of the tool chain. So we see several versions. Suppose that we're interested in, let's say, this one. I can inspect the EasyConfig file, and by doing show EC and just passing the EasyConfig file name, EasyBuild will use the standard search path so that the first file that shows up here with that name, that's the one it will show. And that basically shows me the content of that EasyConfig file. It will tell me which EasyBlock it's going to use, right? So these are all of the key value pairs that make up the EasyConfig file. It shows all of the dependencies, etc. Then typically I would run a dry run to see, okay, what kind of dependencies are missing. So this will print the full list. And this is also one of the things that Kenneth mentioned that changed between versions, right? Previously, you didn't have to add the robot option here. You could just get the full list like that. Now you have to explicitly define robot. Otherwise, you only get BCF tools itself here. But as you can see here, the axes indicate that basically all of the dependencies are already installed. If that was not the case, I would run EB with -- robot, and then it would install all of the dependencies for me. Now I could run without robot, and it will just install BCF tools. Let me see what else I wanted to show here before we continue. Oh yeah, there's also the missing option. So instead of dry run, I can also do -- missing. I don't need to pass the robot option for that. It will just tell me which dependencies are missing. It tells me, so there's 23 modules required in total, right, for the whole dependency tree, but only one of those is missing, which is BCF tools itself. Then before we actually install it, we could do an extended dry run. And with an extended dry run, EasyBuild actually shows us a lot more information on what it's going to do. It doesn't actually execute any of that code. It will just print what it's going to do. So for example, let's see, it's going to load these modules as a dependency. See if we can find the configure step. It tells me I'm going to use this command to configure the software, and I'm going to run that in this installation or in this directory. It will tell me the build command is going to use the install command. The sanity check commands it's going to run after the installation to make sure that the installation went okay. So all of these things you can see already with the dry run command. That's also sometimes quite helpful in debugging. Like if you're not entirely sure, you know, EasyBuild did something, it hit some issue. What was the command that I used? Kenneth will also show some other way, but what was the commands that EasyBuild used? You can see the list here. All right. Now, we've already gone through a couple more slides, so I printed the EC file for you. We did the dry run, we did the missing argument just now, and we did the extended dry run. It's also very helpful if you've made changes to an EasyConfig file or an EasyBlock just to see, you know, does that change have the effect that I intended it to have? So suppose that you wanted to add an additional configuration option. This is a good way to check that EasyBuild actually will run it with that additional configuration option and that nothing weird is going to happen. Yeah, this was just for boost, same thing. So now we're kind of ready to actually install this thing. Let's do it for BCF tools. Why not? It's fast. It's just a very small tool. And now EasyBuild does the actual installation. So you see it prints all of the steps that Kenneth talked about earlier, all of these high-level steps, like fetching the sources. Let's see if we can scroll back a little bit because this was very fast. So it will first fetch the sources, download them, unpack them. If there are patches to them defined in EasyBuild, it will patch the sources. It will prepare the environment by loading the dependencies, run the configure command, run the build command. If there's a test step, it will run the test step, then install the software. Sanity checking is there, creating the module file for this software. And there's a couple of smaller steps, but I think these are the most important ones. And now we have BCF tools installed. So if I do module FE BCF tools, we now see it appear here, right? This is the version I just installed. All right. Yeah, so let's try something else. Let's try SAM tools because now we didn't need the robot command, right? But SAM tools might actually need it. Let's see. The search you can also do with -S. That's a shorthand. So if I would have a look at SAM tools, and again, if I would do the dry run first, you will see that 3 dependencies, or actually 2 dependencies in the package itself are now missing. So if I would run this without robot, EasyBuild will complain and tell me you don't have all the required dependencies installed, right? Missing modules for dependencies, something, something, something. And it will suggest to me, oh, you probably wanted to use the robot option. And now it will install the missing dependencies first. And once that's done, it will install SAM tools. I will not wait for the thing to finish because I don't know. It's probably fast, but I don't know how fast this installation is. Right. So if you've ever built something and then, I don't know, change the easy config because you wanted to add an additional configuration option, you can reinstall that software by adding the -- rebuild argument or the -- force argument. In both cases, it will rebuild the software. We basically already saw this, right? When I did my first installation of EasyBuild itself, it was using the default prefix, this .local/easybuild/modules/all. And that was not on my module path. So then you have to explicitly do a module use to append it to your module path. That is typically something that you would set through some initialization, right, in a Besser sheet or something like that to make sure that you always have this module environment available. Now it already worked because this path was actually already part of my module path. EasyBuild actually doesn't really care where you install stuff. So you could actually have 4 prefixes that you use in an alternating way. As long as all of those are on your module path, EasyBuild will find all of the dependencies installed there, and it will work. But of course, it's not very sensible to spread it out over 4 random locations. However, it is very useful to have the ability for end users to build on top of a system-wide software stack. So if you're managing an HPC system, you typically have an installation prefix that is writable only to you and not to your users. However, if your users want to install additional software, they can just build on top of what you have in their own home directory. And as long as that local directory is also on their module path, EasyBuild will find all of the software and the dependencies it needs in that path as well. All right, and then it's back to Kenneth. Don't forget to unmute, Kenneth.
That's a good point. Thank you, Caspar. All right, so let's see where we are. Right here and the terminal. Okay. So we're looking at the troubleshooting part now. Oh, let me make sure that I'm properly pinned. Okay. Yeah, so looking at troubleshooting. So as I already mentioned, the EasyBuild is not perfect, and depending on your system configuration, things may still go wrong, especially if you're working on your own easy config files, things may go wrong. And it's helpful to have some, let's say, guidelines or some ideas on how you could troubleshoot something and try and fix it. Of course, there's a lot of things that can go wrong. The shell command that you're running may be failing. You may be running into compiler errors, syntax errors in the source code. You may be missing dependencies. So that's actually something Caspar showed. Maybe source files are missing, or you may need to patch something so it actually works on your system or with a newer compiler version. You may be running out of memory, out of storage space. So there's a whole bunch of things that can go wrong. So it's important to know what you can do if things go wrong. And EasyBuild does quite a lot to help you with that. So first of all, there's error messages. If you're seeing error messages, read them, right? And try to understand what they mean. Very often there's already hints in there that may be able to help you. Like the one that Caspar showed, when installing some tools, if there's missing dependencies, EasyBuild will tell you, like, I was expecting to find this module for a dependency. It's not there. So maybe you just forgot to enable the -- robots option. So very often there's useful hints already in there. In this particular case here, the shell command in the build step was failing. So make and then some options with exit 2, and then, okay, that's about it. And you can see I'm already preparing here to do a troubleshooting demo. So this error doesn't say a lot by itself, but then there's something behind it, a log file or output files that you can dive into to figure out what's going wrong. And this may take a bit of effort, right? So maybe the actual error message that is causing the problem is way above in the output file and not at the very end. So one rule of thumb is definitely try to find the first thing that goes wrong, the first error, and then try to fix that one before you continue. So if you see error messages, read them, try to understand them. And especially for compiler errors and stuff, things like ChatGPT and all these LLMs can be quite useful to untangle things and to explain in human language what it all means. What EasyBuild does very well is keeping track of what it's doing. So it has a detailed log file for every installation it does. And at the very start of an EasyBuild session, it will also print the path to that log file. So whenever something happens, whenever an installation fails for unexpectedly, or if you're not sure what EasyBuild was doing at the time you hit an error, the log file is definitely the right place to look. So that will have some often very detailed information about what was being done, in which location a particular command was run, with what the output was of that command. Very often what environment variables were defined specifically before that command was launched, and so on. So all the relevant information should be available in the log file. So for every installation, EasyBuild keeps actually a separate log file, and at the end of the installation, it will copy that log file into the installation directory. So if we look at existing installations here in our little virtual machine, for example, that BCF tools that Caspar installed just now, right here. So this is the actual installation directory for that tool, where you find the binaries for this tool. But you also see an EasyBuild directory in here, and in here you'll find the log file that explains what was going on during the installation. So you can check this. This starts from the top and has a lot of detail, but you can, for example, zoom into the build step by searching for build step, and then see here there was a make -J16, so it's 16 parallel build going on. And here you can see what the output was of that make file, of that make command, rather. So you can see all the details even long after the installation was actually performed. So that log file can be very useful either for figuring out what was wrong, or later figuring out why something is the way it is in an installation. So navigating those log files can be a bit challenging, but they have a very particular structure. So every log message that EasyBuild emits has a date stamp and a timestamp. It also tells you from which part of the EasyBuild framework the log message was emitted and which line. And then usually you have some pretty useful log message that tells you something useful, and also often which location, for example, a shell command was run. Also, the steps are clearly marked, so you can look for starting something step, and then you can really zoom into that part of the installation. And as I already mentioned, to find an actual problem, you should look for particular patterns like errors spelled in various ways with or without capitals. And usually you want to find the first occurrence of an actual error to try and figure out why an installation failed. What can also help is looking around in the build directory, so the location where, for example, a make command was launched. Because in there could be a bunch of files that are relevant. like the make file itself that specifies what make should do, or in case of a configure command, you often have a config.log file, and the configure command may only say something went wrong, see config.log file. So the next challenge then becomes trying to locate that config.log file so you can inspect it more closely. Same for CMake. Yeah, if you can find the CMake error file, that's already one step, but then real fun starts because also CMake does very extensive logging of what happens. But this may also be a necessary evil to figure out what's actually wrong. Now, all of this can be very painful and is still painful, but we've done a lot of work in EasyBuild 5 to actually make this significantly easier. So a lot of the things of where, a lot of the questions of where things are or in what environment is this thing actually being run are a lot more easy to figure out with EasyBuild 5. So whenever something goes wrong in EasyBuild 5, and you've already seen it pop up, so when EasyBuild runs a shell command and the shell command fails, you now get a way more structured error message that gives you a lot of hints and a lot of detailed information. So it will tell you the full command, it will tell you the exit code of that command, it will tell you in which part of the EasyBuild code that command was launched. So in this case, in the build step function of the configure make easy block, it will tell you the working directory, so where that command was being run, and then it will also capture the output and the error output of only that command and nothing else. So you don't have to go into the EasyBuild log file itself. You can just find the shell command output straight in a separate file. And this last thing is where there's some magic that we've spent a lot of time on preparing EasyBuild 5 to make this work well. This is a shell script that you can run. And when you run this, it drops you into an interactive shell session that helps you debugging things. So this will be in the right location, the correct working directory, also with the full build environment setup, like EasyBuild was running that shell command. And you can actually rerun that shell command and you should be getting the same error as EasyBuild was running into. So this helps you a lot in debugging what actually went wrong. Now, to really get this across before we move on, the best way is to actually show this hands-on. So in here, I have a small easy config file prepared, again, for that same BCF tools that Caspar installed. But I added 2 more lines here. Well, one more line that really matters, the other one is a comment. And I'm trying to build BCF tools with a magic compiler option called -faster to try and make it a faster installation. And we're not sure yet if this works, so let's just give this a try. Now, a little bit more about the usage of EasyBuild. So first of all, I've set up things correctly here. Again, show config tells us that EasyBuild is configured to install in our home directory, essentially, and I messed that up. Actually, this should be home/EasyBuild, right? Good thing that I'm checking. I've also set up my module paths to pick up on dependencies. Let's say our GCC toolchain should be there, so that it is working. And I can check with BCF tools what is still missing. So nothing is missing because Caspar already installed it, but I can force a reinstallation, and I'll do that in a temporary directory because we're still playing around and we don't want to kill that existing BCF tools module, which is already there. So we'll tell EasyBuild try rebuilding this, but with this particular easy config file that has that -faster option, and let's see what happens. So it starts the configure step, that went well. It starts the build step, where it's running make with that extra part here for the build command, and then something is going very wrong. And here we can see the structured error message that we're getting. We can check the output of this particular command by just checking this out.txt file. So this has only the output of the make command, nothing else. And at the top here, nothing much seems to be hinting towards what went wrong. So rather than deep diving into the output file, let's run this command.shell script. And as soon as you hit enter on this, it will drop you in a new interactive shell that says this is the shell for this command. And in here, you can start looking at which modules are loaded. So these are all the dependencies for BCF tools. You can also check the environment, say what was the CFlags environment variable, what was the CC environment variable, in which location am I located. So I am in the build directory for BCF tools, and you can start poking around here, for example, expecting the make file that was being used by the make command. So you can see it becomes a lot more easy to start figuring out what went wrong and what environment we're in. Also, if you arrow up, the first thing in your shell history here will be exactly the command that EasyBuild ran. So we can just hit enter on this, retry it, see what happens. And now we very quickly see that this faster option that I was trying just doesn't exist. The compiler doesn't know what this thing is. And then, of course, all things fail. We can exit that shell again, and we're back to our directory where we had that easyconfig file. So you can see by just running that command.sh script, that interactive shell you end up with can be very helpful in figuring out what went wrong. So that's one of the main enhancements in EasyBuild 5. Okay, moving on a bit, let's take a look at adding support for additional software in EasyBuild. And this will be quite quick, but I just want to give you some hints on what this involves. So every time EasyBuild installs something, that means there is a corresponding easyconfig file for it. So every installation comes with an easyconfig file or requires an easyconfig file. So this can be an easyconfig file that is included with EasyBuild itself, or that you got somewhere, that you got from a friend or a colleague, or you can also actually derive easyconfig files from an existing one. So you can tell EasyBuild to take an existing easyconfig file and only change the software version or only change the toolchain. And of course, you can create your own easyconfig file from scratch as well. So starting with an empty text file and building it up gradually to something that EasyBuild can install software with. Most of the easyconfig files, and then I'm talking probably 80 or even more percent, use a generic EasyBlock. So something like CMake or Python package that implements a generic installation procedure. So that's definitely where most of the easyconfigs use. But sometimes, especially for more complex software, you may need to use a software-specific EasyBlock. Again, either one that exists already and is part of EasyBuild, or one that you provide yourself or even create yourself from scratch. Now, there is a bit of a thin line when you need a custom EasyBlock or when you can get away with a generic EasyBlock. It boils down to a bunch of questions, how complex things are or how specific things are to a particular compiler. So if you switch compilers, does that mean you need to change options in the configuration, for example? If that's the case, that's one argument towards implementing an EasyBlock for that, where you can implement this in Python code and logic, do that once, and then forget about all the things you have to change when you're changing a toolchain. So when you can let the EasyBlock take care of all that logic, that actually makes sense to go through that effort of implementing one. But it depends a bit on how complex things are. There are some definite reasons to have a custom EasyBlock, like if your installation procedure requires interaction from the user, you don't want to be answering questions while EasyBuild is running. So we have ways of automating that, but this has to happen through a custom EasyBlock. This cannot be easily done from an easyconfig file where you just do key value parameter definitions. So to write an easyconfig file, again, it's a standard, a regular text file, but it is in Python syntax. So you do always name of an easyconfig parameter equals, and then a value, very often a string value, sometimes a Python dictionary, sometimes a list, depends on which parameter you're specifying. There are only about 5 easyconfig parameters which are mandatory, which always have to be specified in the easyconfig file. Software name, software version are 2 obvious ones. We always require a homepage and a description to have some metadata, what software we're dealing with. And the toolchain that will be used also has to be always specified. Now, there are things in here, like, for example, source files, like what is the actual source code of what I'm installing? Why is that not mandatory? There are easy blocks where this makes sense. When you're, for example, just gluing things together in a bundle, you can have an easyconfig file that only specifies dependencies, where you want one module to load all of these things in one go. And then you're not actually installing any software, you're only generating a module file. So there are cases where it may be a bit weird, but it actually makes sense in some situation to not specify some parameters. So 5 mandatory ones, a bunch of very commonly used ones, like the EasyBlock, for example, to use when you're using a generic EasyBlock, like the list of source files to use for the installation, maybe some patch files for that, and then checksums for both the sources and the patch files. Some options for the configure, build, or install command that you can actually put before or after the particular command being run. and then the sanity check, so particular files or particular commands to run to check for are very often specified as well. Now, if you don't want to write your own EasyConfig file from scratch or even copy an existing one manually and then adjust it, there are some options in EasyBuild that can help you. You can use the try options to, for example, say, I take an existing EasyConfig file that has example software version 1.0, and I just want to change the software version to 1.1. EasyBuild will take that EasyConfig file and change what is necessary for that try option, and then generate a new EasyConfig file and go ahead and try to install it. Same thing for the toolchain. You can very easily tweak the toolchain straight from the EB command line. Now, this is called try for a reason. EasyBuild will just essentially do search and replace in the text file, in the text of the EasyConfig file, and then try to see if the installation works. So you may not need to actually do more steps to actually make a fully working installation. Now, again, whenever EasyBuild generates EasyConfig files, those will be copied eventually when the installation completes. Yeah, and we already see questions popping up, but we'll tackle those at the very end of the webinar. Okay, yeah, when you copy existing EasyConfig files, you can very easily do that. You can do a -- search to locate the EasyConfig file, copy it manually, and then change it. There's also a copy EC command line option where you just give it the name of the EasyConfig file. EasyBuild takes care of locating it and then copying it to the specified location. So that's, again, one less manual step to worry about. And then here, if you're very new to this, to creating EasyConfig files yourself, we have a very good example that we use in the tutorial as well. So this has a description of this EB tutorial fictional software package that just says, try to install this. Here are the sources for it. This is what it looks like. This is the small README file that you get for this fake software package, and then try to build up the EasyConfig file for this manually yourself. And this gives you a head start. It essentially gives you 4 out of the 5 mandatory EasyConfig parameters: software name, software version, and then the metadata. And you can put this in a file, give it to EasyBuild, and then see what happens and gradually work your way up towards a working installation. So if you've never done this, this is a good recommendation to get some hands-on experience with EasyBuild yourself. And in the actual EasyBuild tutorial that you'll find in tutorial.easybuild.io, you can find the answers as well, step by step, on how you can complete this EasyConfig file. And then going a little bit into more advanced things, just to give you a feeling of what EasyBuild can do beyond just regular installations. First of all, one of the advanced features of EasyBuild is definitely the community. So it's very easy to reach out to the community, to get in touch, to get some quick help or quick answers to any questions you may have. Maybe they're very basic. Maybe you're trying an installation and it fails and you're kind of stuck. You don't really know what to look for next or what to try next. So you can share log files, you can share outputs of failing installations, and try to get some help with that. One good way is definitely to connect with the EasyBuild Slack, which has over 1,000 members nowadays. And a good part of that are also active members who take a look at incoming messages and try to be helpful. EasyBuild is used all around the world, big European HPC centers, but also well outside of Europe. And also the EasyBuild user meeting. So that's the group picture we took a couple of weeks ago in Jülich. Gives you a good feeling that this is not a single institution that is implementing and supporting this, but it's a worldwide community. For contributing to EasyBuild, there's different things you can do. You can just report problems or give feedback on things you like or don't like. You can join the discussions on Slack or in the bi-weekly conf calls that we have and try to engage with the community. But you can also make feature ideas, feature suggestions for things that can improve in EasyBuild. That's just more of an idea and discussion kind of way, but then you can also get hands-on and actual help with the actual development of EasyBuild, helping out with contributing EasyConfig files, improving existing EasyBlocks, maybe implementing new EasyBlocks for software that is not supported in an EasyBuild. Or if you're brave enough and want to dive into the EasyBuild framework and write up some Python code to make things better, you can also help out with that. And of course, the documentation is never done, it's never perfect. So any contributions there are definitely also very welcome. Now, one thing we learned very early on is that people who want to or need to use EasyBuild are not necessarily very familiar with Git. And since we're maintaining an open source software package, that is very relevant. So one thing we did quite early on, several years ago, actually almost 10 years ago, is have GitHub integration built into EasyBuild. So you can make contributions to EasyBuild using the EasyBuild command line itself without running any Git commands or running any manual branches or pushing to GitHub yourself. That is very helpful for contributors, but it's also very helpful for the maintainers who test the contributions. This is over about 2,500 pull requests per year. It's actually close to 3,000 now per year. So we also need automation and standard ways of doing things to make this feasible for us to process. All of this is heavily documented and it's very clear in the EasyBuild documentation. But to give you a feeling of what this can do, you can make a manual contribution to EasyBuild by running commands like this here shown on top. So you can take an easyconfig file, rename it according to our standard naming scheme, move it into the right place, create a branch, push that branch to GitHub, and then go into the GitHub web interface and click around to open the pull request. Or you can just run eb new PR and give it the easyconfig file, and EasyBuild will take care of everything for you. So this saves a lot of time. That means you're following a standard process, and it makes things both easier for you and for the EasyBuild maintainers. All right, so that's one thing. Another thing is customizing EasyBuild via hooks. So sometimes EasyBuild does something you're maybe not entirely happy with, or for the particular software package, you always need to add that extra configuration option so it works well on your system. So rather than copying easyconfig files and easy blocks and heavily customizing those, there are better ways of doing that. And one main way is through hooks, where you can write a small Python function, give that Python function to EasyBuild, and whenever it makes sense, EasyBuild will pick up that extra Python code, run it, and then go back to the regular EasyBuild code. So this is very useful for injecting or changing configuration options to dynamically remove dependencies or do additional checks in an installation if you feel EasyBuild is not strict enough, and so on. This is also heavily documented. There are very good examples of hooks that were discussed at previous EasyBuild user meetings or which are available through the EasyBuild framework GitHub repository, for example. But just a very brief example here is a parse hook. So this will trigger quite early. Every time EasyBuild parses an easyconfig file, so reads it and tries to make sense out of it, this hook will be triggered. And here you see the logic. If the name of the software that we're installing is example, it will make sure that the group easyconfig parameter is set in a particular with a particular value. And this is a typical example of something that only makes sense locally on the system, because we're setting a license group here, which is of course very much tied to your system configuration. This is a typical example of something that you can do in an EasyBuild hook. And then another advanced topic is implementing easy blocks. So you may need to implement an easy block for something very complex. You'll need some Python skills with this. You need to be a little bit familiar with what EasyBuild framework can support, what functionality, what functions you can import to use in your easy block. And you typically look at existing examples of easy blocks, or you look at the documentation which builds things up step by step and explains you what all of this involves. I won't cover this in detail here, but do know that this is something we very well support and is very well documented if you need to look into this. And then another nice feature that some people still don't know that it's there, EasyBuild can submit installations as jobs to a Slurm cluster. So if you have, with Kaspar's example, there were only 3 dependencies missing, but imagine you're installing an easyconfig file that needs 100 dependencies or even more. Maybe you don't want to do that on one single node, one single system, but you want to spread out those installations to a cluster and get it installed as soon as possible. So EasyBuild will do this automatically for you if you use the -- job option. It will submit one job per software installation that needs to happen, and it will set dependencies between all those installations to make sure that things are done in the correct order. And this is actually very useful, especially when installing a software stack for a new cluster, for example. You can, with one EasyBuild command, you can get a whole software stack built that sometimes involves thousands of installations. All right, so that was a a little bit of a teaser for advanced topics. And now we can switch back to Caspar for the last bit of the webinar.
All right. Let's first go to the slides. Sorry, this one. And I need to catch up with you. Sorry about that. There we are. So the robot option is super nice. But what if you have something that has a ton of dependencies, like PyTorch bundle, which is something that's built on top of PyTorch. Now, PyTorch already takes ages to compile and already has a boatload of dependencies, and then PyTorch bundle is something that's built on top. It's a lot. Let me just copy this command so we get this PyTorch version and show you how much we're actually missing. Oh, wait, sorry, I already deactivated my virtual environment. Shouldn't have done that. Let me see. Oh, right, sorry. There we are. Now I hope that my module path is still okay. Probably is. Yeah, so it prints all of the missing packages, but that list is humongous. So 144 out of 166 modules are missing. If I wanted to install this with -- robot, knowing how long PyTorch takes, the whole list is probably going to take over, I don't know, a day. Maybe if you farm it out as a job, it's going to be faster, right? But it depends on how many things you can build in parallel, basically. So that's going to take forever. It's not something we want to do, and there's a more clever solution. And that's where Easy comes in. So what is Easy? Of course, we're here in the webinar series on Easy, right? This one is particular about EasyBuild because it's one of the key technologies that we use in Easy for installing software. But for those of you who haven't attended the prior sessions, let me just summarize in 2 slides. Easy is the European environment for scientific software installations, and it aims to build a shared repository of optimized scientific software installations. And with optimized, we mean optimized for the CPU microarchitecture or GPU microarchitecture that you want to use. We want to avoid duplicate work across HPC sites by collaborating on the shared software stack. So right now, every HPC site is installing and maintaining their own software stack. If we can build one common software stack, we can share that effort. And the other benefit is that it provides us a uniform way of providing software to users. So regardless of what system they're on, if Easy is available on that system, they will land in a software environment that they're familiar with, right? So it makes it much easier to move from one system to another. And even if they install it locally, you know, they can start on their laptop with development and then move to a cloud or HPC system later on. Easy should work with any Linux OS. It also works in the Windows subsystem for Linux. If you're on a Mac, you can make it work through Lima. So yeah, there's a lot of options there. And as mentioned, it ranges, like use cases ranges from just running it on a personal laptop to an HPC system or on the cloud. There's a lot of support for different CPUs, interconnects, GPUs, etc. You can find all of that in the documentation. And the focus here is really on sort of 4 key things: performance, automation, testing, and collaboration. So one slide on how Easy works, in case you're not familiar. The most basic part is the file system layer. Let me make this big again. The lowest part is the file system layer that takes care of the distribution, so that makes sure that you can use this software stack anywhere in the world. It's based on the CERN virtual machine file system, which is basically like a network file system but served over the internet. In there, we install a compatibility layer that provides us with an abstraction from the host OS, so that makes sure that the Easy software stack works on any Linux system, regardless of what Linux host OS you have installed there. The concept here is very similar to a container operating system, right? In a container, you also have an operating system. That's what you build all of the software in a container against, so that you're independent from the host OS. We do something similar. The software layer is built against the compatibility layer. So we have EasyBuild in the software layer. EasyBuild creates these optimized software installations for us, and it's configured in such a way that it will use the operating system from this compatibility layer. And then you use the software by interacting with the module command. And the final piece of the puzzle is a small tool called Architect, which basically checks on your system what is the CPU architecture that you have, that you're currently running on. And that is the copy of the software stack that you're getting. So basically, we have all of the modules compiled for a very wide range of CPU microarchitectures, and we decide on which copy to serve you based on what Architect returns. So that's Easy in a nutshell. Here in the next part, I'll assume that Easy is already installed. If that's not the case, you can check our documentation on how to do a native installation. But let's go to our VM again. And here we have Easy installed. So if I do an ls on software.easy.io, there it is. You see I get something returned. So that means that this environment is available. I will actually unuse the module path. So that means that the current module path that's set, it just gets wiped completely, because one of the things you typically don't want to do is mix local modules with modules that are built for Easy. And that's because these Easy modules are built against the compatibility layer with a very specific configuration of EasyBuild. But what I will show you is that you can actually build on top of Easy. So you can still do local installations, but you need to make sure that when you do it, the EasyBuild is configured in the same way or very similar to what we have when we build for Easy itself. So let me do that first. Module path. And I will deactivate my virtual environment. So now I don't have an EasyBuild anymore. If we check the module path, it should be empty. That's correct. Now, let me see. We'll make the Easy module available. So there's a module that you can use to initialize Easy. If you already have a modules tool on your system, then this is a nice way to present the Easy environment to your users. Right? If I now do module avail Easy, it shows you the Easy module. If I load that, if I just do module avail, this is the only thing that's there, right? If I load the Easy environment and then do a module avail, you'll basically see a list of all of the modules that are installed in Easy. All right, but now suppose that I need something that's not in here yet, right? Like PyTorch bundle, right? If I would do a module avail for PyTorch bundle, there's nothing. So what do I do? Well, we have a specific module called Easy Extend that is meant to do installations on top of Easy with EasyBuild. And what this does is it configures EasyBuild in the same way that we use to install software for Easy. And actually, we use the Easy Extend module ourselves if we install software for Easy. So just to show you this, show config. There's a couple of things to look out for here. Let me go through them. So filter depths is one of them. We're actually filtering some dependencies. So this basically tells EasyBuild, don't install these dependencies through EasyBuild, but just assume that they're present on the system. What that means in our case is that the compatibility layer provides these dependencies for us. That allows us to do things like security updates on these packages if we think that's needed. Another thing that's there is the filter env vars. This means that when a module file is created, normally EasyBuild would set the LD library path in that module file. In this case, we don't do that. We rely on the R path. That's another option you see down here. The R path is set to true. That's the default in EasyBuild 5, but it didn't used to be. We've always used it in Easy. And this means that at runtime, when software needs a library as a dependency, it will not search the LD library path, but it will search the R path that is embedded in the binary that we've built. Other things that are custom here that are interesting are the hooks file. So as Kenneth mentioned, you can use hooks to customize your installation. In Easy, we also sometimes do this. For example, when we see that something doesn't build for a particular microarchitecture. So we've had an example where, let's say on ARM, a particular piece of software didn't build with vectorization. It just didn't work. That's a bug in the software. We're not going to fix that, right? We might report it upstream, but then the workaround is that we disable vectorization for that particular architecture and only for that one, right? So that's something we would typically do via a hook. Then there's the install path, which, as you can see here, points to my home directory, but it mimics sort of the prefix that the general Easy prefix also has. So it has a version. We're using the 2023-06 version of Easy. Then there's software, our OS, our architecture, the vendor, and the microarchitecture. So this allows us to have these copies that are specific to the microarchitecture, that are specifically optimized for the microarchitecture, right? And we also do this for local installations. So when I would now do a local installation, it ends up in this Zen 4 specific prefix. If I would switch to a Zen 2 node, I would not actually see this installation, right? Because I haven't done it for Zen 2, I've done it for Zen 4. And the final piece of the puzzle is this sysroot. That's again an EasyBuild configuration item where we tell EasyBuild we're not building against an operating system that resides in Slash, but we have an operating system that resides in a custom sysroot. Namely, it's part of the CVMVS repository, right? So the compat layer is in the software.easy.io repository /versions/compat. And that's basically the particular configuration items that are related to Easy. Let me rerun the missing command, and now we can see if I would have to build against Easy. Easy can already provide a lot of the dependencies. Here you see a lot of output from our parse hook from Easy. Like every time it gets invoked, EasyBuild will print, "Hey, I'm invoking the parse hook." Most of the time it does nothing. But for example, you see here for grpcio, apparently we've modified something and we'll print that on the terminal. And now you see we only have 7 out of 140 required modules missing. All of the other dependencies can now be used from Easy. And that will save us quite a bit of build time. Right, back to the slides. Let's see. So we've gone through this, the configuration that's specific. Another thing that's specific to Easy Extend is that it respects a number of environment variables. The first one is Easy CVMVS install. This is something that you would never set as an end user. This is something that we set when we want to build software for the main Easy repository. And that means that the prefix we'll use is this /cvmvs/software.easy.io/whatever. So in principle, you'll never use this. What you might want to use is Easy Site Install. So suppose that you're an HPC administrator and you want to offer some software built on top of Easy to all of your users. You typically want to install that in a prefix that's available for everybody on a network file system with read permissions for everybody, right? So that's exactly what will happen if you set this environment variable. Be aware you need to set it before loading the Easy Extend module because it will affect sort of what the Easy Extend module will do. If you set it, then you can configure where stuff gets installed via the Easy Site software path. So that's something, it uses a default, but if you want something else, you can tune that. Then there's 2 more that you can set. There's the Easy Project Install. This is more for, let's say, scientists that work together and that might have a project space in which they want to install some additional software. They could build on top of Easy in that project space. And then things like the group writable bit are set to true. We have a set GID bit that's set to true, etc. And they can use the Easy Project Install environment variable to point to a directory that directory has to exist, right? But a directory in their project space. And then finally, and that's the default option, is to do a user-based installation. So then it will just end up in your home directory, and then you have this, again, this versions, the Easy version software operating system, and the subdirectory for your particular architecture and microarchitecture. And that's really just a user space installation. You can also tune where this ends up, right? So if you want it somewhere else, you can change that directory. So we'll not actually install this because even the 11 modules will still take a fair bit of time, like too much for the demo, but we can definitely do a dry run. So let's suppose that I will do a dry run here. Oh, wait, I meant an extended dry run, sorry. Without typos. And now we can see, of course, what EasyBuild will do for PyTorch bundle, which dependencies it needs to load. It's a whole list. Actually, this is already taking quite a bit of time. And now I did it without robot, right? If you would do it with robot, you get this for all of the 7 or 8 dependencies that it still needs to build. All right. Some final remarks. If you don't set any of these easy install environment variables, the default is to do a user-based installation. Easy extend installs and optimize for the current host. So that's something to keep in mind. That means that the install path is based on your current host architecture. The optimization that EasyBuild does is dependent on your current host architecture. And that also implies that if you have a login node that has a different architecture from your batch nodes, you need to run this on the batch nodes that you want to use the software on, right? So first create an allocation, then do your easy extend installation there on the batch node. If you have a heterogeneous cluster with multiple architectures, you might actually want to repeat this process multiple times so that you have a copy of that software optimized for every architecture in your cluster. And finally, something to keep in mind is that the modules that are installed with Easy Extend are only visible after loading Easy Extend again. That's a first time thing. So when you load Easy Extend, it will try to check, does this directory, this install directory already exist? If so, it will do a module use of that directory, so it will append it to the module path. But if the directory doesn't exist yet, it will not do that. So the very first time you install something, it will not yet be on your module path, and either you need to manually add it to your module path like we saw earlier, or just reload the Easy Extend module. And with that, we've reached the end of the webinar. So I guess we'll move on to questions. Kenneth, do you want to take over? I don't know if you've already seen if there are questions on the...
Yeah, there is one question. Maybe you can just briefly cover the last 2 slides, Caspar. So.
Oh, we have more. Yes, true.
Yeah.
So if you want to learn more about Easy, there's a website, there's a Slack channel, the join link is on the website itself. It's a bit long for the presentation. Of course, there's extensive documentation. We have a blog where we sometimes do more hacky stuff, showing stuff that's very new. There's a GitHub project on Easy, so all of the code related to Easy is on the Easy GitHub. There's a paper if you want to read more about it. We have a YouTube channel, and also we have bi-monthly online meetings where we basically discuss updates that we've done in the past 2 months. So if you want to keep up to date, then that's a nice thing to attend. Yeah, and all of this, of course, developing something like Easy takes resources. Those resources come from the Multi-xScale project, which is a Euro-HPC joint undertaking, Center of Excellence, and about 50% of the funding in that COE goes to the work on Easy.
All right. We can check on questions. If you have any questions that you want to raise here yourself in Zoom, please raise your hand in Zoom. I will let you unmute. So Angela, I think you should be able to unmute and go ahead and ask your question. That hand was raised quite a while ago, so I'm not sure if it's still relevant. I'm not seeing Angela unmute, so maybe the question has already been answered through Slack. There were a bunch of good questions in Slack, mostly by Loris. I think most of these have actually been answered already. There is one I want to pick out is how EasyBuild is different from SPAC, because Loris is mostly experienced with SPAC. That's a difficult question to answer. In some sense, EasyBuild and SPAC are quite similar. And in many other ways, they're quite different. So they are a different solution to sort of the same problem, I would guess, but with many small details that make it a very different tool. It's more US based than EasyBuild, which is more European based, but that's a bit of a vague difference. In terms of how it works, I always say that EasyBuild is more targeted towards HPC support teams that build a central software stack for their clusters and their users, while SPAC has more features that are more interesting, let's say, for software developers who need to juggle lots of different dependencies. But that doesn't mean that either of them cannot be used by the other group. So that is a bit of a hazy difference as well. Yeah, it depends. It really depends on what type of aspects you're mainly interested in. And if you have more specific questions on that, please raise them in Slack and we can try to answer them. There is an old presentation that I did in 2018 that compares EasyBuild and SPAC and a bunch of other tools for installing software on HPC systems, but that's definitely outdated now. So we should actually do an updated version of that at some point. Okay, see, Eshan has a question. Eshan, you should be able to unmute.
Yes, thanks for the very nice presentation. Just something crossed my mind, and I'd like to share the question, though it may be very dummy question. So, because of the renaming of some EasyConfig parameters in EasyBuild 5, some of the older EasyConfigs would be obsolete somehow, and they require an update. Could you please comment on from which toolchain on this would be affected, and what is a possible solution if we want to say install some old stuff?
Yeah, so if this is mostly about the renaming of parameters, like renaming config opts to configure underscore opts, I guess, we're going to make that a gradual thing. So right now, both names are actually supported in EasyBuild 5 already. And which one you use doesn't matter. Everything should keep working if you start using the new options or the new parameter names today already. At some point, we will deprecate the old options, but keep supporting them. So if you use them, everything will work, but you'll see a deprecation warning that says you're still using the old names. Please try and stop using those.
Yeah.
And then in EasyBuild 6, that will probably be a hard error and say you're using old names. This is how you should rename things. I will probably have an EasyBuild option that says, please map the old EasyConfig to the new one and let me continue.
Yeah, indeed.
So
Thank you very much.
We'll make it as gradual and as painless as we can.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. It is definitely a long-term effort. That's also why it didn't fully happen for EasyBuild 5 yet. We definitely underestimated that a bit when we started working on it.
Understood. Thanks.
Okay, any other questions here in Zoom? Or Caspar, I'm not sure if you saw anything particularly interesting to cover.
No, I think most of the other ones you've covered in the chat. I think that's sufficient, right? Quite specific questions. So
yeah, indeed, there's nothing particularly general here. So
it is a lot of information to digest. So if you come up with questions later, feel free to definitely ask them on the Slack channel, and get at me or one of the other people will try to answer it as best we can.
And you can raise them either in the Easy Slack. So EasyBuild is definitely one of the main tools in Easy. So if there's any particular questions on EasyBuild, we can also answer them there. But the main place to engage with the EasyBuild community is definitely the specific EasyBuild Slack as well. So you're also welcome there. And there you'll probably find more people that can help you in terms of hands-on problems with EasyBuild or general questions on EasyBuild. Okay, if there's no more questions, then I guess we can wrap up here. Caspar, thanks a lot. We still have 2 sessions coming up in this webinar series. So next week will be easy for continuous integration, continuous deployment. So we've done some interesting things in that space. And then the last webinar will be using Easy as a base for a system stack. So a bit more advanced of what Caspar has shown today. So using EasyBuild as a base and then building stuff on top of that in either system-wide or project-specific or even user-specific. So you're definitely welcome to still register for that if you haven't yet. Okay, that's it. Thanks a lot, everyone. We'll wrap up here and hopefully see you next week.
Thank you for your attention. See ya.